Hi folks, welcome to the wrap up for September's reading, and we're going to take a slightly different approach than I have for the last couple of months. We're going to tier rank them using one of these tier ranky things off the internet. The first book that I read in September was Permafrost by Alastair Reynolds, and this is a novella. And this is a time travel tale with a difference. We're in Russia, and Reynolds, at the start of the novel, opens a narrative loop. Valentina and Antti are on the run. Vikram has just been shot in the head by Valentina for reasons that are unexplained at this point, and Miguel has been stabbed in the process, also stabbing Antti. Something quite exciting is going on, but we don't yet know what it is. The future is reaching back into the past in the hope of preserving a solution to impending disaster, nothing less than the extinction of humanity, which by 2080 is living on diminished stocks of preserved food. And the reasons for that are gradually revealed as the novella progresses. I think this is a great example of a time travel tale with well thought out paradoxes, and it considers too what happens if an even more future also reaches back and tries to interfere. The manner of time travel is interesting. It might remind you of Altered Carbon by Richard Morgan, if you've read that. And I also enjoyed the resulting confusion and conflict that generates. I enjoyed the way that the paradoxes are handled, particularly when a change in the past has an effect in the future or the present, depending on your perspective. And there's a gradual rubbing out of the original timeline at a very individual level. Personal memories, things that you know in your head, facts, are suddenly hard to remember and then gone entirely. The loop that Reynolds opens at the start of the book is closed in satisfactory fashion. And for a novella, I think there's an awful lot packed in. I enjoyed it. I give Permafrost 8 out of 10. It's a stellar splendour. Next, I read the Tar-Aiym Krang by Alan Dean Foster, and this is the first Alan Dean Foster book that I've read since the early 1980s, I think. And I know that Alan Dean Foster has his fans, and particularly of the Pip and Flinks books, so I was very interested to see how I got on. I think I'm right in saying that this is the first of the Pip and Flinks books, which are all set in the Humanx Commonwealth setting, which is a setting for many of Alan Dean Foster's books, or so I gather. Flinks is a young lad. He's a bit of a beggar with a side hustle in juggling and magic tricks. And Pip is his alien lizard friend that accompanies him everywhere. Flinks is minding his own business, fleecing the tourists for cash when he's asked to be a tour guide by some mysterious off-world strangers. Flinks, of course, offers to take them up on that for a fee, of course. And he ends up going on an interstellar voyage with them to find the mysterious Krang, which is on the planet, the map for which Flinks conveniently acquired in a fight earlier in the book. So they end up going on this long journey with these strangers, and they get to the mysterious planet, which has got some alien relics on it, and something mysterious called the Krang, which is either a musical instrument or a weapon, depending on who you believe. And it certainly looks like a ginormous church organ, but it has other tricks up its sleeve, it turns out, and much jeopardy ensues. My overarching reaction to this book is, it was fine. It was nothing special. It didn't blow my socks off, but equally, I don't really have anything particularly negative to say about it either. It was a pleasant way to spend a few hours. And I think this is probably, perhaps along with the other books in the series, probably one of those books that if you read it when you were younger, a teenager maybe, and lots of people did, but because I'm coming to it as a grumpy 50-something-year-old man, I certainly wasn't wowed by it. So I give the Tar-Aiym Krang a generous, I think, 7 out of 10. It's a planetary pleasure. Next, I read Timelike Infinity by Stephen Baxter, and this is the second book in the so-called Xeelee Sequence, although, if I remember right, it's the first of the books to actually mention the Xeelee, although we don't see any in this book either. We're a few thousand years in the future, and humanity has had its wings clipped. After a period of expansion into the galaxy and some interstellar trading, humanity has been boxed back into the solar system by the Cax, a bizarrely alien species who are intent on exploiting our planetary resources, and us poor old humans to boot. The Cax and their living and very powerful spaceships have long been our overlords, it seems. In the pre-Cax era, something called the Interface Project towed a wormhole out into the stars at near light speed, leaving one end of the wormhole in orbit around Jupiter. And the Cax destroyed that end, but the tow ship Corshi returns 1,500 years later with the wormhole. A secret cabal of humans, the Friends of Vigna, have managed to construct an odd sort of spaceship under the noses of the Cax, and they head through the wormhole back to the pre-Cax solar system. The big question, of course, is can humanity use the opportunity, now that they're forewarned, to head off the Cax invasion? But can the Cax exploit the same wormhole to prevent this, and what paradoxes might result? There is quite a bit of jumping around between the eras in the book, and it's a bit of a job to keep up. And it's Stephen Baxter, so there's a lot of rock-hard, sciencey stuff going on too. The Friends of Vigna have a very, very long-term project in mind. They believe that at any one time, the universe, the entire universe, is a giant quantum superposition with all the possibilities existing simultaneously. And they believe that this will persist until the universe ends, specifically until we get to Timelike infinity, when something called the ultimate observer will choose which of these possibilities, these realities, is best. At which point the superposition will collapse and only one timeline will remain. And the Friends of Vigna want that timeline to be one in which humanity thrives. But who gets to be the ultimate observer? Baxter supplies the answer to that question at the end of the book. I enjoyed the mad science and the crazy time dilation effects and the truly alien aliens. And one of the main characters is a chap called Michael Poole, who pops up in a number of Baxter's books. 200 years old, he's accompanied in this story by a virtual of his estranged father, much more youthful than he himself is now. And I thought that the dynamic between Michael Poole and his father was fun. Some of the plot centres on one human administrator in the Cax era as he visits with the Cax governor in orbit. He seems to be very on board with the Cax dominance, but through the verbal sparring that happens between them, we find that he's actually less of a quisling than it first appears. I read Raft, the first of the Xeelee Sequence books earlier in the year, and while I enjoyed that, Baxter's debut novel, I think I preferred Timelike Infinity. It's a more serious book, if I can put it that way. It's on a much grander scale with much higher stakes, and there's a lot of impressive concepts within. From a hard science perspective, I think that Stephen Baxter compares with Greg Egan, an author who I've struggled to read in recent years. But importantly, the plot doesn't get lost in the sciencey stuff, which I think Egan is often guilty of. So if you want your head to hurt just a little bit, to be challenged by the science, but engaged in the story, then I think Timelike Infinity is a classic of its kind, and I thoroughly recommend it. I give Timelike Infinity 9 out of 10. It's a galactic gem. Next, I read The Wilding by Ian McDonald, and this is rather different to Timelike Infinity, and arguably it's quite different to what Ian McDonald usually puts out. Certainly it's different to anything else of his that I've read so far. The Wilding is a folk horror tale rather than science fiction. We're in Ireland at Loch Carrow, which is the site of a former industrial extraction operation which has scoured the bog to the bedrock for peat for use as a fuel in homes and power stations. And over a number of years, the area has been allowed and managed actually back to something like its former self. It has been rewilded. Lisa is the main character. She has a shady past as a driver for Dublin drug gangs, and after some time doing community service at the rewilding, she's now an employee. And a Dublin school group is arriving for adventures in the wilding, an outdoor sleepover deep in the bog. They're a typical moany group of teenagers. They're surly, cynical, withdrawn, defensive, argumentative, cocky even, and troubled. And with a few of their teachers and a couple of the wilding staff, led ably by Lisa, they head off into the bog for their adventures. But there have been strange reports, sightings. Farm animals have been slaughtered by what the farmer insists must be a wolf, introduced by the tree-hugging hippies. Sounds are emanating from the deep bog. Something is a-stirring. It sounds like a perfect location for a school trip, right? Like any good horror movie, the group, the teachers, the staff, the teenagers, none of them are safe, are gradually picked off by an eldritch mix of horrors. Ancient megafauna that has no business being in a 21st century island, and stranger creatures still. And it's left to Lisa, not much older than the children herself, to lead them out of danger. Their phones and their GPS don't work, and even their paper maps are unreliable. They get turned around. The very ground that they walk on is treacherous. It is a bog after all. And to add to all that, it's getting dark. And being Ireland, it's now raining hard. And the group is cold and wet and hungry and badly equipped. Something ancient, something dangerous has been buried deep for centuries, and now it's back. The bog and the plant life within seem almost sentient, conspiring to herd the group away from the edge, away from safety. And I thought that Ian McDonald did a great job building the sense of dread and fear. What is it exactly that's out there in the bog, and what do the weirdos from the repopulated village in the middle of the wilding have to do with it? Lisa, I thought, was a great character, but 2 or 3 of the kids are also really well drawn, with hidden strengths and mental resources that become key to their survival. Whilst it's not science fiction, I enjoyed The Wilding well enough, and I think I'm going to give it 7 out of 10. It's a planetary pleasure. That seems a little bit harsh now, because I certainly enjoyed it more than I enjoyed the Tar-Aiym Krang. So, one is more of a planetary pleasure than the other, is I guess what I'm saying. Next, I read the Ophiuichi Hotline by John Varley, and I'm afraid to say this was a bit of a bore. At one point, I even declared that I was DNFing it. I got fed up with the disjointed structure of the story, and I'd made peace with that decision, a rare DNF for me. And then I found myself with an hour or 2 to kill, and refreshed from a snooze, this book was still within reach, and I decided to give it another chance. I wasn't 100% convinced that was going to be a good idea, but there was a payoff of sorts at the end, and I suppose I'm glad I finished it, but only a bit glad. My main regret is the week that it took me to get through it, and my lack of conviction in the DNF decision and the better books that I could have been reading instead during that time. But anyway, enough complaining. What's it about? The Ophiuichi Hotline concerns clones, and it concerns humanity being shoved to the edges of the solar system by mysterious invaders who have saved the Earth for the true intelligences on the planet, the whales and dolphins, although that already happened many, many years previously. It also concerns paying the phone bill for lots of useful information that has been coming down the titular hotline for centuries. Lilo is one of the clones of the piece, and I suppose that we can say that she, in the aggregate at least, is one of our main characters. And this, by the way, was my chief difficulty with the book. There were too many clones, all of whom were too similar by definition, but doing different things with insufficient clues given when switching viewpoints, making it all seem very disjointed to me. I did like some aspects of the clone thing. It was interesting that clones developed different relationships with clones of the same other person. Lilo is not the only individual cloned in the book. As is made clear via the various clones, in this time it is possible and indeed common for people to switch up their gender, something which Ian Banks, of course, makes later use of in his culture books, although I don't suppose that Varley was the first out of the gate with that idea. What was just about worth sticking around for was the reveal towards the end of the Ophiuichians themselves and their true galactic purpose in sending all that information to poor old humanity in the first place, and more importantly, what they now want in return. Overall, for me, it was a big fat meh. It's Varley's debut novel, and it's on the Pringle 100 Best Novels list, but it didn't shine bright for me, unfortunately. So I'm afraid I give the Ophiuichi Hotline 5 out of 10. That's probably being generous. I think at the point I was going to DNF it, it was definitely in the cosmic catastrophe category, but I think since I persevered and the ending was just about worth it, I'm going to call it a nebulous narrative. 5 out of 10. Next, in quite a change of scene, I read The Execution Channel by Ken MacLeod. James Travis is the main character, and he works for a company that does various kinds of IT work for government and government contractors in the UK. And he's also, it turns out, a spy. Not for the old enemy, not Russia, not even China, but no, it's France. Ken MacLeod's books nearly always involve some interesting geopolitical rearrangements. And I think Ken himself has said at various points, it's the future, but you couldn't get there from here. So in this world, it's post 9/11 and post 7/7 in the UK, and the US and the UK are more and more aligned. Paranoia and government surveillance the norm. And entire groups of people fall under collective suspicion in the name of homeland security. Travis has 2 adult children. Alex is in the army on deployment somewhere in a different flavour of forever war in Central Asia this time, whilst Roisin is an anti-war activist and she's camped out by RAF Lucas in Scotland. Although it's an RAF base these days in name only, it's really a US Air Force base in disguise. Roisin is taking photos of the base when she sees a strange device being unloaded. What could it be? And that remains a mystery for a while as the base is consumed in what appears to be a nuclear fire. First instinct is to assume that it's a terror attack, but if so, who's it by? Roisin escapes but is nearby when the police pick her up. And her father James is also close to another incident on the motorway network, triggering a suspicion that there's a link between the two events. There's a general feeling of paranoia and mistrust, all against a background of misinformation, of misdirection and economic deterioration. It does not feel like a fun place to be. And the fact that it has a ring of familiarity about it is a bit of a worry, frankly. The Travis family are subjected to all manner of indignities in the pursuit of a convenient truth. Meanwhile, on the TV, there's a 24-hour channel, the Execution Channel, showing the grisly deaths of criminals, hostages, unfortunates and enemies of the state. The Execution Channel reads more like a spy thriller than a science fiction novel, though it most definitely is a science fiction novel, as becomes clear towards the end of the book. So overall, it was a good read. I thought uncomfortably current in some respects. As I said, I blew through it inside a couple of days. Quite the contrast to the Ophiuichi Hotline, which in comparison was a massive slog. I give the Execution Channel 8 out of 10. It's a stellar splendour. Next, I read Heliotrope by Justina Robson, and this is a short story collection from the author of Natural History, which I've read and enjoyed earlier this year, I think. And then other books such as Mappa Mundi and Silver Screen and Glorious Angels, which I do have, but I haven't yet got around to reading. So in summary, I really enjoyed my time with this book. Several of the stories in Heliotrope are set in the same world as the novels Mappa Mundi and Natural History. I enjoyed being back with the Forged of the natural history stories. And in this book, there's a nice story about a father looking for his missing daughter, helped in his search by a Forged with a particular sensitivity. And he finds his daughter, but not in the way that he expected. There's another story about an autistic child and a dead horse's head in a pond, which doesn't sound like it has much going for it, but actually it was quite an affecting story. One of the earlier stories in the book, Body of Evidence, I think could easily be the script for a Black Mirror episode these days. And in it, a woman is paid to test an implant which tells her, whispers in her ear, in fact, what people are really thinking. And this, as you might imagine, is both a blessing and a curse, but she can't remove it without forfeiting the substantial payment for her test. The opening story, Heliotrope, is set in a fantasy second world, which was to be apparently the setting for a novel that never, unfortunately, saw the light of day. An apprentice artist in this story is tasked with drawing some sketches of a famed dancer, thought by some to be a god, so that her boss can use them to make a sculpture. And while she's sketching, she's entranced by this dancer, producing her best work ever. And slightly oddly, Legolas makes an appearance, or at least he seems to. Lisa is undergoing some kind of therapy in an institution, and she's sure that the guy that's turned up in the last couple of days, who's busy doing the washing up, is Legolas, the elven star of Lord of the Rings. Quite why he's doing the washing up in a mental institution isn't clear, and she wonders aloud if he was traumatised by Aragorn's death in the Silmarillion. And I think that Justina Robson does a nice job injecting a bit of ambiguity into this story. What's real, what does Lisa merely think that she's seeing, and what is entirely imaginary? In summary, there's a lot of variety in this collection, and I think that's the thing that I enjoyed about it the most. There's a nice introduction by Adam Roberts, which bigs up her writing, and I certainly enjoyed it. And the main outcome is that I want to give natural history another go, and I'm also keen to read Mappamundi. I enjoyed the stories that were set in the same virtual world that seems to be a feature of that book. Heliotrope, unfortunately, isn't that easy to get hold of. It was published by Ticonderoga Press in Australia, and you can get hold of copies of it in the US. It's almost impossible to find in the UK, but it's not all that easy to get hold of. Apparently there is an ebook, but I'm not certain if it's still in print, if that's the right word for an ebook. You can probably find it. You might have to hunt it out a bit. Anyway, I give Heliotrope 9 out of 10. It's a galactic gem. Next, I read Chasm City by Alastair Reynolds. Chasm City is the second of his novels, and it's set in the same world as the Revelation space books, but it's quite separate as a story. You can read it on its own. There are 3 plot threads, and the connection between them is somewhat tenuous, even incidental at first, becoming stronger and stronger as the book progresses. One of the threads is on Sky's Edge, a planet in a perpetual state of war, sometimes a cold war, but often hot, between the northern and southern groupings on the planet. And this planet, Sky's Edge, was populated initially by a flotilla of sleeper ships which were sent from Earth, the first such interstellar mission. Tanner Mirabel is a mercenary providing security services for the local warlord, and he's a protagonist for this thread and for the next. The second thread is set in Chasm City itself, once a gleaming splinter cut deep into the crust of Yellowstone, the seat, along with the glitter band in orbit around the same planet, of the Belle Epoque, a period of great creativity and riches. By the time of this story, however, Chasm City is in a mess, for reasons that become apparent to us and Tanner as the story progresses. The result in Chasm City is a split between the wealthy and the influential that live in the canopy, the part of the city clinging to the walls of the chasm, and those that live in the mulch, the slums that are down on ground level. Tanner is in Chasm City on the hunt, continuing some business that started back in the first thread on Sky's Edge. The seeds of that war on Sky's Edge boarded the flotilla of ships to make the long 150-plus year journey. The third thread, which I enjoyed a lot, was set on the flotilla of ships. Now, over a number of years, we follow the life of Skylar, or Sky Houseman, who was a scared child at first, and later a leading member of the flotilla. And we get more of Sky's backstory through a doctrinal viral infection that Tanner is suffering from. His dreams are full of Sky's past. The plot threads don't converge in place or time exactly. It's more that things are revealed in each one that move the plot in the Chasm City thread forwards. And although this is a reread for me, it's a long time, maybe 20 years since I've read it the first time, and I remembered almost nothing about it other than a vague sense of the vibe in the Chasm City itself. This meant that the surprises, one might say revelations, that pop up in the closing sections of the book were effectively new to me again, and they really worked well. I like the sections on the flotilla of 5 or 6 ships, and they're ostensibly on the same mission. They want to get to Sky's Edge to settle the world, but the rivalry between the ships and their captains grows over time into a simmering cold war. There are even rumours of a secret ship. Sky as a character gets darker and darker, slightly balmy by the end of the book and very ruthless. He means to ensure that his ship gets to their destination before the others, by hook or by crook. Chasm City as a location I thought was great, and I enjoyed the descriptions that we get, a Tanner's eye view of the city and its denizens. I really enjoyed being back in this world, and I feel renewed motivation now to reread the other books in that same Revelation space universe. I give Chasm City 8 out of 10. It's a stellar splendour. Next, I read The Water Knife by Paolo Bacigalupi. He's the author of The Wind-Up Girl, which I really enjoyed last year, mainly for the lush world building that exists in that book. And he pulls off a similar trick with The Water Knife, although the setting being in the US is perhaps more familiar. We're in a nearish future US that's being ravaged by the effects of climate change, and we get snippets of news from the coastal regions and the massive hurricanes that are battering them. But this tale is mainly set in the dry, parched regions of the central US. Texas is no longer habitable, for example, and its population are on the move. They're the poor refugees of the day. In California, in Nevada and Arizona and other states with cities carved out of the desert, water is now scarce, even scarcer than it is today. And cities live or die on their water rights. States compete with states and cities with cities. Chinese investors are in the background, busy building self-contained arcologies, a home and a haven for the fortunate and the favoured. Crime lords run entire sections of cities, one with a compound patrolled by, slightly bizarrely, very hungry hyenas. In this increasingly desperate world of accelerating decline, whoever controls what remains of the flow of water in the great rivers controls life itself. We're introduced to a small group of characters who carry most of the plot of this tale on their backs. There's Maria, who's a Texas refugee, a bang-bang girl with a side hustle selling water. Angel is an enforcer, a ruthless water knife, so called, doing the bidding of somebody called Catherine Case, who's big in the Southern Nevada Water Board, which is the source of real power these days in Las Vegas. Lucy is a journalist, and she's been sucked into the vortex of a Phoenix, Arizona, barely hanging on by its fingertips. She was once content to be merely an observer, but now she feels part of the news story. She lives there, after all. Lucy has a tenuous hold on the very edges of a news story. A friend of hers has been brutally murdered, and she suspects that it was to do with the big water rights deal that he was boasting that he was on the edge of doing. And Angel is sniffing around on behalf of Las Vegas because he wants the water rights for Nevada. Maria, the Texas Bang Bang girl, is merely tangled up in events, or at least to start with. I felt that the story progressed at a good clip, the pacing was good, and there's some redemption and resolution at the end of the story that I really enjoyed. But like The Wind-Up Girl, my main joy with this book was the vision that Bacigalupi conjures. And it's not a fun future, and sadly all too easy to imagine, given a few more decades, maybe not even that, of rising temperatures and changing weather patterns. I really like the sense of things being on the absolute edge of chaos, the untold stories in the blank eyes of the Texans and the displaced peoples, the UN and the NGOs on the ground, and the cheap price of life, the thin and powerless veneer of what remains of the federal government and the state structures turning on each other. It was a compelling vision. I enjoyed it. I give The Water Knife 8 out of 10. It's a stellar splendour. And my final read of the month was Norstrilia by, of course, Cordwainer Smith. And this book came about after Smith spent some time in Australia, apparently, basing much of the attitude and the personality of the inhabitants of Norstrilia, the planet, on them. And on this world, sheep farmers are amongst the richest people in the galaxy. Strewn is a longevity drug, and it's a byproduct of the giant sheep, several hundred tons of mutton in each case, that are farmed on Norstrilia. Strewn is used by almost everyone in the settled universe. Rod McBan is our main character, and he's the 151st heir to the richest family on Norstrilia. And he's owner of the most productive sheep station on the planet, the Station of Doom. Although Rod is the heir, he's considered to be defective as he has a disability. He can't speak or hear telepathically like everyone else these days. Or at least he can, but only sporadically and not in a controlled fashion. And Australia is a harsh environment, and farming is tough, but extremely lucrative. And to ensure that the wealthy stay wealthy, the population is strictly controlled. There are no immigrants allowed, and the local population is capped, with the youth thinned out in an annual culling process. And Rod has escaped that culling 3 times now, but is subject to a final test. And he's assisted in this final test by one of the lords of the instrumentality, and with no small amount of his own ingenuity. His life, though, is in danger from unexpected directions, and he needs to lay low. Rod flees to Earth, but not before making himself the wealthiest person in history by manipulating the strewn futures market, and in the process actually buying the entire planet Earth. And once he gets there, he meets Kamel, who's one of those sexy cat ladies that pops up from time to time in science fiction books of a certain era. She's an underpeople, descendant of animals that have been raised to sentience. The underpeople are a second-class citizen on Earth, but they are central to the smooth running of the place and central also to the denouement of the plot to this book. To be honest though, the plot is of less interest to me than Smith's writing. I'd read a few of his short stories before picking this up, and in Norstrilia, he has a bit more room to manoeuvre, I think. And I really enjoyed the flourishes and the curlicues of his prose as he describes the strange world on both Norstrilia and Earth, actually. The setting and the world building, I think, is excellent, in my humble opinion. I really enjoyed my time with Norstrilia, and I'll certainly be going back to read more of his short stories. I give Norstrilia 9 out of 10. It's another galactic gem. And that means that I have a bit of a three-way tie for Book of the Month. But I think if you forced me to pick one, I would give it to Heliotrope by Justina Robson. I suppose her prose isn't quite as strong as Cordwainer Smith's, and it doesn't have the diamond-hard science fiction of Timelike Infinity. But I've had a bit of a road to Damascus conversion on the short story front recently, and I enjoyed the variety of the stories in this collection. So my Book of the Month, therefore, for September 2025 is Heliotrope by Justina Robson. As always, thank you for watching, and until next time, goodbye for now.